Fear the Walking Dead Season 3 Episodes 7 and 8, The Unveiling and Wrath of Children. Definitely a good episode. It was the 2-hour mid-season finale. Got to see some interesting stuff. We got to actually see Ophelia, which I was definitely hoping for. I was like, I really hope they don't do this as like an end of the episode sort of thing, end of the second episode sort of thing, like here's what's happening with Ophelia. So we do get to see her. They do in the beginning of the official mid-season finale during the second half. We actually get her talking with Otto, which I thought that was him when he first showed up in this season, and I was just like, I'm not really sure, because I was thinking, like, it must not have been him, it must have been some other random person, and of course it was, like last year, so I wasn't really thinking too much about it. But when they first got to the ranch, I didn't really mention it because it wasn't exactly in my head, but like somewhere in my subconscious I was like, this is why I think she's going to end up meeting them at the ranch. It was because like I recognized his face for like that split second where he showed up, and I was like, oh, that's the dude. But she wasn't there, and I was just like, okay, well, she's not there, and it just kind of, it left my mind. It didn't even occur to me like, oh, that was definitely him. What happened there, and why wasn't she at the ranch? So we do get to see that in the second half of this mid-season finale. And basically, he's just racist. It was just like, here's some water, helped you live. There's no use for you here because there are no other brown people here. And it was just like, wow, he's a real dick. Like, he's just a real dick about it. Like, he was always kind of a dick. It was kind of that weird in-between ground where it's like, you kind of don't like him, but no, you can't really hate him. And, like the whole thing with the land grab stuff, it was like they constantly talk about how it was officially bought, so it's like, I can't, they didn't technically steal it, because it was, the land grabs and all that crap. So it was like, I guess legally speaking and stuff like that, is like, I can't really hate this dude that much. He is kind of a dick, though. He's definitely a bad father, and probably did some other crappy things, most of which kind of come to light in this episode. And it's like, nope, he's like just full on racist about like, just get out of here. And she was basically about to die, and that's when she meets Taka, I believe is how you pronounce his name. And so he ends up saving her, and that's how they end up together. And so she sides with them. And then, of course, we have the rest of our main characters who end up running into the ranch. Characters through the army and them being douchebags, and then, them ending up at the ranch. So it was a very interesting kind of pair of episodes where it's like, alright, you have one character, you got Jake, and he's doing everything he freaking can to make this stuff work. And it's like, hey, I want to do a parlay, trade hostages, so Alicia ends up staying, and Ophelia ends up going to the ranch. And it's like, this is how this is going to work out. We do the water reserves. Everything's supposed to work. And I felt like in this episode, and I felt it a couple of times, but this episode I felt like it really hit home. And I was like, I feel like Madison is at the point where Rick has been for a little bit, or where he was during certain elements, where he was getting a little too big for his britches. Like before Negan came along officially, it was like, oh, they think they're doing some good stuff. And then it's like, check it out. Things got crappy because you thought you were so good. And I felt like that's where Madison was. But fortunately, by the end, ultimately, things did kind of work out. They lost some people on both sides. But in the end, things did kind of work out. But I was definitely like, she's pushing things a bit far. Like, they have this actual deal. And then it's like, all right, well, screw that. We're going to go in. We're going to get Alicia. And then we'll get out because she didn't trust that they would kind of hold up their end of the bargain and all this other stuff. And that just led to a bunch of chaos. Whereas, like, she teams up with Troy, and she's pretty much got everybody questioning her, because Nick is like, so you kind of teamed up with him. Otto says the same thing. It was like, yeah, so Jake was doing this, and Troy backed your idea of going in, and bodies fell. I was like, I wonder why Troy would want to do that, where he gets to go in and most likely end up killing people, which they certainly did because it had a bit of a firefight. It's like, yeah, like, I don't think you had a good plan there. But she stuck to her guns. And, like, for me, I was like, gosh, I don't know. I can't really say that I agree with her path and the way that she went about this, because it did seem like they had some sort of a deal. May not have, worked out too well, but obviously wouldn't after what they did with, trying to get Alicia back in the middle of the night and then taking out a couple of people. So it was like, all right, well, this just causes more problems than it's worth. So, of course, Jake tries to do the right thing still, where he takes Ophelia back, and then, he's about to get scalped, and that's where they kind of have, like, this extra plan where she ends up being dumped back at the ranch, where it's like, oh, they believe that I gave you guys some extra information about the ranch, or, about their camp and stuff like that. All of that ends up being employed because she put anthrax in the coffee, poisoned the guards, like, basically their whole defense line who was staying up to make sure everything was good. All of them end up getting poisoned with anthrax. A couple of them end up dying. Of course, Nick being a main character, he does not end up dying. But it got pretty crazy. And so, Madison ends up chasing her down in the night. She goes back to the camp and is like, hey, tell me, what the drug is. That's how we find out it's anthrax. She's allowed to live, and she goes back to the ranch and it's kind of just like, there's chaos. We don't really know what the F is going on here. They try a secondary plan, which is to steal all the relics and stuff of Taka's family, and is like, he cares about that because she, kind of gets that lesson. So it was just interesting. Like, the whole way through, it was just like, okay, it's very interesting how this is playing out. Constant back and forth. Like, nothing seemed to be working. I was honestly expecting just more and more people to keep dying as the episodes went on. But ultimately, it kind of came to a bit of a standstill where Madison does end up making an agreement where Otto basically has to give himself up. He has to surrender his life in order to kind of, calm things out. And I was very surprised by the way it played out. And honestly, I liked it. I thought it was pretty cool. And they kind of step into that in the scene beforehand, where we get a very interesting story about how Madison actually killed her own father because she was tired of seeing him beat her mother. And I thought that was a really good moment. And it's kind of why she's so strong, and why she was, from the very beginning was just like, this is what we have to do. And kind of why she's very similar to Salazar, because that was always like their thing, where it was like he was always going a little bit further, but that was mostly because she was trying to keep everyone together, and Salazar was kind of just like, whatever, like he didn't really care. So they have the same sort of ideals, but she was just trying to make sure everyone stayed in the same place, and he didn't really, care too much for that. So it was a very good story. I like the way that they did that, where, we reveal the secret to, she reveals it to everyone, like us as well as her own children. So I thought that was very interesting the way they handled it. And then right after that, it's like, I'm going to go talk to this guy. It's like, I will do what I need to do to make what I believe is the right thing happen. And in this case, it was definitely the right thing, because we find out that she did have that deal. And it wasn't a plan to, get someone back or anything like that. It was 100%, if you die, everyone else gets to live. That's pretty much, it's said and done. And I like the way it played out. Like, it's going back and forth. Otto's, is like, so you're going to kill me? She says no. It's like, you're going to do it yourself. He's like, I'm not doing that. He basically talks about the land and how it's, it's meant for, people who aren't cowards and things like that. And that's when Nick ends up coming in towards the end of the episode. And they had a very interesting story. I don't know if I really think it made the most sense. It reminded me a bit of, honestly, the last season, where things kind of just went crazy at the last second, and then people just switched allegiances, like when they were kicking everybody out of the hotel. It kind of reminded me of that, except it made a bit more sense. And Nick, after Otto's drunken thing a couple episodes back, he decides to dig through his house, and he finds a skull. So he finds the skull, and he ends up having this conversation early on in the episode with Otto, and he gets the full story of everything that happened. So they talk about, and this was like the big thing where it was like, it was always weird to me where I was like, I can't really hate Otto as the character, because it was like, everyone's got it bad in some way. Like, that was really obvious. Like, some stuff was going wrong. Otto was a crappy father, and then just the way he kind of handled some things, you could just tell it's like, he's not like the greatest person. You can just tell by some of the stuff he said and done. And one of the big things, like the whole point of this kind of war that seemed like it was building up, was the fact that his family like stole the land. And it was kind of weird to me where I was like, okay, they talk about how their family stole it, and I was like, alright, well, did they actually steal it? Did they not steal it? But it seemed like it was like, legal. So it was like one of those weird things where it was like, how legal was it? Because even in this episode, they almost get into like actual specifics where it was like, my family specifically bought this land, and then that's when things actually got bad. And it turned out to not actually be about the land at all. It was more about the fact that, well, that was definitely a part of it, but it was kind of about the fact that them getting the land ultimately led to some people kind of getting killed off, particularly Taka's uncle and father. And then there was someone else. They mentioned that there were 3 people, so there was someone else who was clearly not as important. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. That's pretty crazy. But ultimately, those people dying, it was one of those things where it was like, I can't exactly say he's the villain in that situation where they bought this land and then the people come in. Like, there's obviously other actual history stuff, but this was like 30 years ago. Like, they even talk about the fact that like this was his father. So his father was like a middle-aged man. It's not like this was like, a super long time ago. It was like this recently happened where Otto and his family got the land. That was one of the weirdest things about it to me, where they had this big issue about them stealing the land. And I was like, if they bought it, a couple decades ago. That's very different than like actual history, and it was like so weird as they were going through, and that was always the big thing to me. And then I felt like in this it really changed from them stealing the land to the land actually led to an actual issue, and so it was like the land was still a problem, but definitely the deaths were obviously the main issue. But it was so weird to me because it was like I still can't say Otto is a horrible person, racist, and a crappy father, but I'm like the actual land stuff, to me at least, based off of the way they said it, maybe it was just me and I just kept hearing it in a weird way, but every time they talked about the land, I was like, I just don't see how they stole it. Like, I feel like what they were constantly mentioning was far more historical stuff than what actually happened with Otto specifically. I was like, his family just bought the land. That's very different than, like, actual horrible history of Native Americans and stuff. And I was like, I feel like they're just making it that, and I felt like it wasn't that. I felt like they could have done a better job actually making it like, no, his family generations ago actually stole the land, and it was their family that stole it from, and they call him Walker is his last name, but from Walker's family. And I was like, that would have made sense. But then because they were always bouncing around it, and then this episode finally came, and it was like, no, they actually bought it. Because I was like, if they bounce around it, where it's like, because I think the first actual excuse Otto did was like, it's stolen here and then bought there and given back or whatever. I was like, okay, that's really ambiguous. So I was expecting them down the line to be like, all right, at some point, it was actually just flat out stolen. It was truly stolen by Otto's family, and then it was just like, oh, generations have passed, no big deal, whatever. And that's how Otto kind of looked at it. And then Walker was like, no, that's supposed to be my family's land. But it was like, no, they bought it like 30 years ago. I'm like, that's just an actual purchase. Like, if they owned the land and then they sold it, it was so weird to me, like, how that made sense with them being angry, where I was like, that's a totally different situation to me compared to like actually stealing someone else's land. So it was so weird to me, like the way they ultimately came down to it was like, no, we actually bought it. And I was like, well, that's a deal that his own family made. It was so weird to me because it was like there wasn't like third parties or anything like that where it was like someone else tricked them into selling it or anything. It just seemed like it ultimately came down to they sold the land and then they considered it stolen after that. And I was like, that just seems so weird to me. It was so odd because they didn't go into more, I guess, better details. In my opinion, like I said, it's just the way they explained it in the dialogue of the show is just like, I feel like deserves a much better explanation if I meant to look at Otto as like the villain and his whole family for like stealing the land. And I'm like, every time they talk about it, it's like, no, they actually bought it. No, we bought it from them. A few decades ago, like I said, Walker's dad was still there, so it was like, couldn't have been that long ago. Obviously, if they killed Walker's dad, Walker existed, so it really couldn't have been that long ago when they bought the land. And every time once they finally got down to it, I was like, all this time I thought they were going to build up to him just admitting, like, yeah, my family stole it, like, decades and centuries ago, that sort of thing. I was like, nope, they actually just bought it, like, 30 years back. I'm like, that's not stealing it. Like, like I said, they didn't add, like, an extra party where it made sense, where it sounded like he even stole it. It was like, it seemed like they legitimately just sold it and then kind of taunted them after, and that's why they were killing their cattle and stuff. And I was like, I don't know, unless I missed something. But every time they said, I was just like, once it came down to it, I'm like, I feel like this sounds like they had an actual deal and Otto bought the land. But that was like my biggest pet peeve about like the whole thing. I kept expecting it to be like, ultimately, it's going to be like Otto was bad because he did this, or his family at some point did this, and Otto was kind of just keeping it going. Then it's like, no, they legitimately bought the land. I don't see where the stolen thing keeps coming from. Like I said, they're using like actual historical moments to relate to Otto when it didn't apply to him specifically. And I was like, I feel like that's not the same thing to just be like, this one specific person is like every other person from, centuries ago, like that sort of thing. I was like, I feel like that's very different to say that happened, 20 or 30 years ago. It's a different situation when they made it, so ambiguous early on, like it was going to build up to Otto was actually a part of like this horrible thing with his family and stuff, and then it was just like an actual deal that happened. And I was like, something about that felt odd. It was just like it left it right down the middle again, at the end. And I guess that's kind of the point, was to be like, who do you really root for? Because you have these people saying that they stole this land, and you kind of believe it, because especially some of the little hints and things that are being dropped about Otto and his family, and then him somewhat being ambiguous about it the whole way through, where it's like, it's stolen and this and that, and he would give stuff and it's like, well, either you bought it or you stole it. Like, that's pretty much it. And I don't know, I guess the whole point is that he's been lying the whole time and that his family did actually steal it, but I don't know, maybe I just didn't get it and I was just super confused. But that really got me, like, by the end I was just like, it seems like he wasn't the bad guy for actually stealing the land. And that just seemed like a bunch of stuff they added in just because it's historical and it works to, like, hate a character. It's like, yeah, that makes sense to hate somebody that way. And then that's not even what it was. It was way more about the fact that he killed this dude's uncle and his father, and then, like I said, some third person that clearly meant nothing. So it was just weird to me that that was like the whole point leading up to this final episode, and then it's kind of revealed that really there's a totally different situation that's really what made an impact on the characters. And I was like, why wasn't it just that from the whole, from the get-go? Why would not just have it be, I know that you did this, and then Otto just denies it, like, the whole way through. Like, I never killed your father, or I never killed your uncle. I don't know what happened. It made for a good reveal, for sure, so not having it from the very beginning makes sense, but it just really bugged me. I don't know. Like, I know I took a whole rant on that, but it really bugged me. That was, like, the whole thing where I was like, everything they kind of said just seemed like, alright, well, you can't attribute actual history to an actual deal. Like, that's totally different. If they own that land, they didn't have to sell it, but they sold it, and then they, like, taunted them. They didn't add in extra stuff where it was like they were forced to sell it or something else happened, like I said, that tricked them into selling to Otto's family, or to Otto and, like, the other founders. It was like they just flat out sold it, and then they taunted them after. They didn't really make it seem like there was actually other stuff that contributed to it. It was like they just had a deal, and then that was it. And I was like, I feel like that could have been explained much better. And like I said, I keep saying, like, I probably missed something. I feel like I did. I feel like I have to have missed something, but it's kind of happened before. So it's like, maybe I didn't. I don't know, it's really weird. Like, with this show, that's kind of happened before, like I said, with the allegiances and things being done where it's just like, out of nowhere, this is how it is now. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like maybe I missed something. I hope I missed something, and it makes a lot more sense than the way I saw it. But when it came down to the ending, I was just like, I feel like that was just a normal deal, and it could have easily just been about the family thing from the very beginning, and that would have made way more sense, and it wouldn't feel oddly ambiguous, by the end, to me at least. But that's really, like, my biggest pet peeve about the whole season finale. But I still did enjoy it, to be totally honest. I did enjoy it. But Nick coming in, him switching allegiances and stuff like that, that was another thing, kind of like the hotel stuff. It was like, alright, well, I guess it makes sense that he would not like him, because that's the official story, is that he killed him. But once again, it was like, well, is he really the bad guy in that story when they were taunting him after officially making a deal with his family? That's like that where that weird ambiguous sort of feeling comes in, for me at least. But for Nick, it was just like, oh, well, you bought this land from them, and then you killed them after they were, like, taunting, or, like, killing your cattle and, this sort of thing. So he kind of just instantly switched, and it was like, after that, there were some cool moments, I'll be honest, after he decided to kind of switch from Otto's side to kind of doing his own thing. I really love some of the moments where he's almost, like, taunting him, and it's like, are you scared, and stuff like that. I really love that. And then it comes down to the end when they're in that room, and Otto is just like, this, basically kind of talking up Madison, how she's so awesome, and how, Nick can't do anything for himself. And Nick was just like, nope, boom, and he just blows him away, and that was it. Unfortunately, he had to give up that super awesome revolver. I was like, that sucks, he can't keep the revolver, because I just thought that was a cool gun. But ultimately, in the end, he was the one that did it. Madison was definitely about to. She was, like, right there. But ultimately, Nick is the one that pulls the trigger. So I thought that was very interesting to have them have this connection, and then it flips once, Nick learns, like, the true story, and why, this sort of denial and this hidden truth is really what, pushed Nick over the edge to kind of switch sides. And I was like, okay. That made way more sense than the hotel thing from the last season. It's just the fact that it's like, that seems to be something they've done, where it's just like, boom, there's a story now, and then poof, it instantaneously switches characters' allegiances. And I guess it just instantly took me back to the last season, which didn't make any sense last time. But this season, at least it made sense. I was like, this makes sense, so I'm much happier. It just happens to take me back to last season, where they almost did where they did do the exact same thing, where it's just like, poof, allegiances changed, get out, that sort of thing. But I like the way it ended. Ultimately it was peaceful. They do keep the ranch. We do actually also get to see Strand in this episode. He had what honestly was my favorite scene in the entire episode, which was him randomly talking to the Russian cosmonaut, or astronaut, I don't know, I said cosmonaut, that's like an actual old term. But him talking to the Russian guy, I thought was a great sequence. I was like, man, he finds the boat, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, and he goes back, and it's messed up, and of course, it's on the rock, so it's not like he can push it. So it's messed up, but he goes in, he clears it out, and it's like, well, this is all I've got. We don't get to see how he survived, Salazar leaving him, but Strand survives. That's his thing. So he gets the boat, and he's drinking. He puts on the jacket and stuff, and it's just like, this might pretty much be it. I'll just relax here. And him talking to the Russian guy, I thought that was just a great sequence. Where it's like, man, that's just such a good moment where he's talking to him, and especially I love the first line the guy gives is like, "You sound like an American thinking everything only happens to me," and it's like it's all over the world. So I thought that was a great moment too. But them having like this little bonding thing where they're saying quotes and stuff, and the guy's like the line when he said, "I'm speaking to you from my grave." I thought that was the best line out of the whole thing. But the whole part of it was just great to me. Where it's this guy like floating around the planet, and he just happens to be in that perfect alignment as he's kind of spinning around, and they get to talk for a little second, and I just thought that was a really, really great moment, and it kind of tears Strand down for a minute, and I was like, this is a great moment. That was definitely my favorite scene, just because it was like, wow, it was one of those really out there things. It was almost like, in The Walking Dead, like the actual comic series, and even the show, they translate some stuff, and they're just those moments where it's like, wow, that was really comic book, where it was just like, out of nowhere, this crazy thing happened, and that's what I felt like. I was like, this is really like a comic book moment where it's just this really crazy thing, and it has so much weight for such a small moment where it's like, it's this dude in space talking to you on the ground, and he can't, he can't get back to Earth. He's going to die in space, just floating around the planet. And I was like, that's, just thinking about that, I was like, that is a really, really great moment to have in there. So I love that. That was my favorite moment. He sets the boat on fire at the end. He torches the Abigail, so it is officially gone. Because I thought they might do something with it, but it was like, nope, he went in, he got some goods, got out of there and torched it. So he's, once again, off on his own. Who knows where we'll end up next. But I love that sequence with him talking to the astronaut. I thought that was the best part of the whole season finale. It had some good moments, but something about that, I was just like, man, that just got me. I was like, that was a really, really great moment. So I really love that. And I'm definitely excited to see where we go in the future. We have, the technical allegiance between these two groups. We have Madison carrying this head, in a backpack at the end. So it's like, all right, well, the groups are at peace. What does that mean for Ophelia? Salazar coming back in. Eventually, what's going to happen with these characters? When are they going to meet up? So I'm very excited. Everyone still thinks Salazar is dead except for Strand, so it's hard to say, like, who ended up getting to the ranch first. Like, I'm just so curious. I'm like, at some point, these characters have to get there. We don't know what Luciana is doing either. She took off. I still think she's going to be the one. Now that especially since we've seen Ophelia, I have to assume that she's going to be the one to, run into the characters from the prologue, the passage thing from this season. So, looking forward to that. But I did enjoy this season, this mid-season finale. Like I said, the thing with the whole deal about the land grab and stuff, I was like, that's just me. I would love to know your opinions on that. Of course, I want to know what you guys thought about this whole mid-season finale, so please just put your comments down in the comment section below. Your favorite parts, your least favorite parts. Like I said, though, my whole big issue was the land grab stuff and just how they didn't seem to make enough sense. But I would love to know your thoughts on it and just everything you think about it, so please comment below, let me know. And, of course, thanks for watching.